Hey, it's all with another video to keep stretching out all this news from BlizzConline. This bit of news is something to get excited or maybe a little bit frustrated over, because it's about gearing in PvP and in Mythic Plus and in raids. Sorry to you world content players, but I couldn't find anything for you. Maybe next time. At this very moment, in Shadowlands, gearing is a little bit frustrating depending on who you are. PvPers with a sufficient skill and tenacity have been able to reach greater item level heights far more reliably than their PvE counterparts. Solutions are on the way for Mythic Plusers with the upcoming Valor system in 905, and Raiders currently have increased drop rates from Castle Nathria as a band-aid for whatever is coming in patch 9.1, which won't be months from now. But let's jump ahead to 9.1, which we learned quite a bit of if you watched BlizzConline and read Wowhead and watched and read a whole bunch of interviews. Again, I don't blame you if you didn't search far and wide. But there were statements made that could change WoW as we know it. Maybe not at the level of letting players of the opposite faction play together, but it affects how we'll farm for gear, a concept that's far more easier to grasp. In a group interview with Icy Veins, Ion Hazzikostas revealed that raid gear in the upcoming Sanctum of Domination raid would have perks and or effects that would make said gear the best gear to use in raids. If you want to think back, this might be similar to the Azerite traits from Uldir, which gave a special stat buff when the trait was active in that raid, which meant having it active gave a pretty clear advantage. This is a pretty big deal in a few ways. It means Blizzard does not have to repeat what they did in Castle Nathria, which was to have the last two bosses in the raid drop slightly higher item level gear in some effort to make that progression through the raid that much more special and rewarding. Raid-specific effects will just do the job perfectly. If they wanted to, Blizzard could also use this idea to set up, I don't know, something like hard gear checks, which is a stupid idea, but, well, let's just play with the idea anyway. A gear check boss might do a raid-wide attack that deals reduced damage depending on how much a percentage of the team is wearing gear from that raid, or maybe you'll just out-heal it or something like that. Or similar to Uldir, wearing raid pieces will grant a stacking buff that increases throughput or decreases damage taken at a flat amount, and so on and so forth. Again, these are ridiculous ideas, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point of how a simple bonus like this can elevate how important gear for its intended source can be. Also from the interview, we learned that Blizzard's talking about adopting a version of the PvP gearing system from Warlords of Draenor. Don't take my made-up numbers too seriously, but think of it like this. Imagine top-end gladiator gear had an item level of 210. Meh. It sounds kind of whipped, but when you get into a PvP situation, the item level scales up to 226, the equivalent of mythic gear. This gives room for a PvP gear to be pretty easy to obtain, and it makes it viable for running reasonably high mythic keys and heroic raids without totally letting down your friends. This presents an opportunity to create a soft separation between PvP, raids, and dungeons that isn't perfect, of course, but it addresses one of the biggest complaints about gearing in WoW these days. The feeling, not the reality, but the feeling of needing to play in content that you don't care about for the sake of high-end optimization. I do agree that mathematically, yeah, sure, you should do what you need to do in order to meet that upper-end calculation, but the regular old gamer in me is really sympathetic to World of Warcraft PvPers who just want to be World of Warcraft PvPers. We've seen the groaning over having to farm for that Blood of the Enemy essence, and the struggle to complete that one PvP island match. And before Shadowlands, PvPers would carry on about Mythic Raiders steamrolling arenas, because they happen to gear so fast, they dominate the brackets and kind of break the system for everyone else. So far, Blizzard's only been talking about this as an idea, and it is not a confirmed thing. After all, there's still 905 to worry about. But I've long been a supporter of kind of separating progression between the three pillars of content which only started in Legion. My opinion, but I believe that a person in dungeon gear shouldn't just outright replace a person in raid gear, all other things equal. Let the best gear come from the game mode that you actually play in. Ian's statements a while back that a player who does everything should get access to the best itemization, it wasn't very considerate of said player's desires. That said though, if in 9.1 there is going to be a separation in the way that we itemize and plan out our gear, the PvP path is going to be the fastest and most efficient way to get PvP gear. It's going to get you started in other content, but it's going to be much less effective in top-end dungeons and raids. The raid path will be the only way to get the best gear for raids, but considering the smaller loot tables, it won't be the best gear for dungeons or PvP. And finally, the dungeon path will give the most flexibility with secondary stats, considering the much larger dungeon loot table. But the gearing is going to feel a little bit slower than PvP, and it won't feel as effective as raid gear in a raid setting. But I still prefer this sort of gearing. Who cares about the pacing as long as everyone is doing okay in their own segment? But we also need to consider the lower end, accessibility. Dungeons and raids already have an item level floor through various catch-up systems, weekly events, these days the mission table, and so on and so forth, but PvP doesn't really have a great answer at the moment, so I suggest a simple solution. Just give PvP gearing recipes to the armor crafting professions. This gear would also, in a way, help freshly minted characters get into maybe heroic or mythic 0 dungeons, but it gives them a fighting chance in battlegrounds considering their item level scaling. And without the crossing over of gear, we also have to ask ourselves, won't the gearing feel slower? Like, hey, I did my raid and I barely got gear this week, so now what do I do? Now this is where we have to consider the near future. Mythic Plus is going to have the Valor system to ensure that even if you don't get a drop from the end of that dungeon, you at least get some Valor to upgrade gear that you already have, or that gear that you'll hopefully get soon. We have no indication that raids are going to have its own point system, but I'm really hopeful that one will come. That way every method of gearing, PvPs, dungeons, and raids, will have a sense of familiarity and consistency. Now some of you might be thinking, well, there goes all my inventory space, Soul, thanks a lot. To which I would say, well, that isn't so different from now, is it? As a frequent offender of inventory space, trust me on that one, I think managing multiple gear sets is a small price to pay for those of us who want to play every form of WoW. In the long run, I think that's a lot better than the constant measuring and rebalancing of which path of gearing is the fastest. There doesn't need to be winners and losers in this space. Having just enough separation, I think, is the way to go. So I'm hopeful of something like this, but how about you? What are your thoughts, your wants, your worries? Share it in a comment below. Hit that like button because you're nice, and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. And because you're nice. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.